Hello and welcome to my JRPG devlog. In my last episode, episode 0, I talked about how I developed the combat of the game to the point that it is at now. For this episode, I would like to talk more about the story and core gameplay loop of the game. First, let me introduce you to the main character, Luz. Well, this isn't her final design, so I guess you could call her Beta Luz, or Bluz for short. Bluz is a student at the Academy of Light, a special school made to train users of light magic, a mysterious power only a few are gifted with. At the academy, students are trained to defend against dark creatures, called husks. They appear at a special time at night, known to cause abnormalities in reality. However, this isn't the only task students at the Academy of Light have. They are tasked with protecting one of the many crystals, which keep the world in balance. Every few years, a light magic user must go on a pilgrimage to purify each of the crystals at special locations that change for each person, in order to keep the world in balance. But on the day one of the pilgrimages was supposed to start, a masked guy shows up out of nowhere and goes,
"Okay, so basically I'm going to kill all of you and mess up your crystal."
Do you really think we will let you do that?
No, but I don't need your permission.
So he does. He kills a bunch of people and goes over to the crystal in order to depurify it. Bluz is understandably pretty pissed about this and goes over to confront him in the crystal's holding room. She's too late to stop him, however, as whatever he did to the crystal puts Bluz in a coma and essentially starts the apocalypse. Husks now roam the earth, turning anyone they come across into one of them, and every day is now night as the moon never leaves the sky. Bluz wakes up a year after the incident and seeks refuge in a small community of people who all live underground in order to avoid the dangers above. She must now venture around the world to search for each crystal and purify it, and stop the masked man's evil scheme. This is where the core gameplay loop comes in. The depurification of the crystals means that the location around each crystal has been transformed into an ever-changing labyrinthine dungeon. Luz must manage her time in the dungeon, with her time spent doing other activities outside of the dungeon. Every time you reach a new crystal location, you'll be given a certain amount of days to reach the top of the dungeon and purify the crystal. If you don't purify the crystal before the deadline, it's game over. However, you can't just throw yourself at the dungeon every day, as you'll need to spend a lot of time improving your skills, taking on side objectives, and interacting with NPCs in order to stand a chance to survive. So let's say, for example, you wanted to beat a boss at a certain level of the dungeon, but it's too hard for you to defeat, so you spend some time outside the dungeon exercising to increase your strength. Then, after enough exercise, you can beat the dungeon boss easily. Time management is key, as almost every activity you do takes up a certain amount of time, and not every activity is available all the time. For instance, you may only be able to meet certain NPCs during certain time frames of the day. This means that if you want to see everything the game has to offer in one playthrough, you have to plan out your time carefully. As you may be able to tell, this was heavily inspired by Persona series, as the series also has a big emphasis on managing your time each day as you explore a dungeon. But one key difference is that my game doesn't take place in a single location. After every deadline, Luz must travel to the next crystal location in a different part of the world and meet entirely new people there. This is where the Maiden Abyss inspiration that I mentioned in the last episode comes in. Luz will gather a party of allies as she travels to each location, and they will all come to rely on each other and bond heavily as they traverse this broken version of the world they once knew. But before that, of course, I need to focus on the first area of the game, which is the city in which the Academy of Light is located. Every location in the game will have a dungeon and an NPC hub where the player can improve their skills and hang out with characters. The NPC hub will be the underground, where the community I mentioned earlier live, and the dungeon will be the Academy of Light. The first thing I decided to tackle was the dungeon. The dungeons are similar in structure to top-down Zelda dungeons, as they are made up of separate rooms and corridors that connect those rooms. Each room will have some combination of enemies and loot, with some special rooms housing an NPC or two. Basically, there is a central room with 4 openings, that each spawn a corridor when the scene starts. Then those corridors spawn a random room from the list of preset rooms I created. Those rooms spawn even more corridors, and the process continues until the room limit has been reached. Once the maximum amount of rooms has been reached, if there are any openings, I spawn a dead end in their location to close them off. To stop rooms from overlapping, I have a boolean on the room script that turns on a few milliseconds after the room has been spawned. If a room spawns on top of a room that has that boolean on, that room will delete itself and turn into a dead end. This method of room generation allows me to strike a perfect balance between generated and handcrafted content, so I can make sure dungeon crawling isn't too repetitive and always stays fun. Now that basic dungeon generation is in the game, the next step will be populating the rooms with items and enemies. I've got a few school assets I can use to populate rooms for now, so that won't be much of an issue. However, getting enemies into the dungeons will be a different story. Seeing as the levels are randomly generated at the beginning of the game, I'll have to put in a system that generates a nav mesh once the dungeon is finished generating so the AI can actually work. But I'll have to save that for next episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more. Check out my Twitter if you want to see more of my game before these devlogs come out. Thank you so much, and goodbye.